All right. Okay, well, we'll start off with prayer as we had usually done. So, well, God the Father, we just come to you right now and grateful for the break that we've had over the summer, but we're also just looking forward to being with one another again and really looking into um, to the things that you've put on our hearts and our minds, and in my heart and my mind, um, about worldviews and just the truth, Lord. And so we just ask that you would lead us in these studies. In your name, amen. Oh,
Mm.
okay, so like I said in last spring, I thought it would be a good idea to at least do a little bit of like worldview analysis. And I'm going to be honest with you, I feel a little bit out of my element with it. So, like when you, I've been doing this for a long time with teaching the Bible, and the Bible, I mean, it's there that you got the verse, and then you like try and explain the verse, and then you go to the next verse and try and explain that one, and and so the outline's already there for you. So, with this, I mean, I've done a lot of studying over the summer, read lots of different things, and tried to come up with kind of a way to go through this. I think that when I first thought about it, and I think this still remains, in terms of my goal, the goal would be that to go back to the Bible, not too long from now, but I want to make sure that we as a group, and as people that are pursuing Christ and pursuing Christianity. Just saying, okay, Kenzie's just leaving work. So anyway, but as pursuers of Christ and pursuing our faith, that we have a solid foundation that we can fall back on. That this is not just something that, well, I was raised Christian, or it's just my preference, but rather that we see Christianity as being true, as being objectively true, and having what I would consider great explanatory power, right? So some people, like, as a professor that introduces himself as a Christian, there's been, lots of times that a student will come to me and say, well, why are you a Christian? Or how are you a Christian? Something like that. That maybe don't word it like quite like that. And, some of my response, oftentimes is, well, I think that Christianity has the greatest explanatory power of the worldviews that I'm familiar with. And by that, what I mean is that if you start to take the data, whatever it is, and you start to analyze it through the grid of what a worldview is, I think Christianity is the best at explaining that data. Okay, and that's what I mean, the greatest explanatory power. So here's what I think that we'll go on and do. So we're going to start tonight. Just what is a worldview? What are the questions of a worldview? So that's all we'll do tonight. I don't know if we'll take all the way to 8. We'll see how long I talk. Okay, and how many other questions you all have. So, Kyle, how's it going?
Not bad. How are you guys?
We're great. We just got started.
Okay.
So yeah, so you didn't miss much. You missed maybe a minute or two. So you didn't miss much. Although I'm also recording it. So
Okay.
um,
Sorry, I'm still running around in the background, but I'm here and I'm listening.
no problem. No problem, Kyle. So, and Kinsey says she's just leaving work. So let me respond to that text um, here. I know, right?
Stickers.
I know.
There wasn't a one that you've already used that you told me
No,
about?
I don't like the thumbs up. I like the hang loose one.
Oh, it's Shaka?
Yeah.
Shaka. Okay.
So anyway, uh, So anyway, Kyle, I was just explaining the purpose behind what we're doing, right? So if you remember last spring, I said that we're going to try and do some worldview analysis, and the purpose that I thought of, in introducing that last time, in the spring, is I just want us to all have a foundation that we can fall back on. And I was, kind of explaining how, I've had lots of students come to me and ask me, well, why am I a Christian? And my typical response is because I think Christianity has um, the greatest explanatory power. When we start to take data in, and we're going to define data and talk about data and that kind of thing, but when we start to take the data in and put it through the grid of a worldview, I think Christianity is superior to all the worldviews that I'm at least familiar with. Okay. And I do think that it is actually objectively true. So, and that's what I want you all to walk away with is the ability to at least feel that for yourself if you don't already feel that, but to also then maybe even, engage with the people around you. So here's what I think that we'll be doing. I don't know how long this will take. I'll be honest with you. It might just be this fall semester. We'll try and get through it by December and then return to another book of the Bible. We'll see. Okay. But tonight we'll just talk about what do we mean by worldview. Okay, that's all we'll try and deal with tonight. And then I think that the next time we get together, what we'll you spend some time thinking about is what do we mean when we say something is true? What is the truth? Okay, and what does that mean? Because in our world and in what we call postmodern world, the idea of something that is true can sometimes be very different. And so we want to make sure that we define our term true. This is true. What does that mean? Um, and then and then after that, I don't know how long this will take. We'll actually just look at the Christian worldview, okay, and just try and analyze it and it alone. And then from there, what I want to do is jump into actually going through this book, Finding Truth. So by Nancy Piercy, because I was doing lots of reading, and Nancy Piercy is she's if you've never read any of her stuff, she has written Total Truth, and then she wrote this book Finding Truth, and then she wrote a book The Toxic War on Masculinity, and then Loving Your Body. So I mean, there's lots of things that she's written, but um, she is really good in terms of her knowledge and in terms of the way she articulates things. And I started reading this book um, probably at the very beginning of the summer, and I was like, this is exactly what I've been saying my whole life. This is like not my whole life, but this is exactly what I'm saying about Christianity is that it has this great explanatory power. So she kind of takes like 5 or 6 chapters to explain that. So I think it'd be really good to just kind of walk through that together and use that as kind of the basis of what we're going to do. So, okay. So that's where we're headed. So in terms of just the worldview, because I've used this term, I mean, it can be, not to state the obvious, but it can be your view of the world, right? So that's not very helpful. But everyone has what we would call a worldview, and a worldview is simply the lens at which we view all of the things that uh, come across our minds, that come across us on a daily basis. All of this data, all these things, and so there's some grid that every single human being is going to view the world through, and there's a set of convictions that they believe are true that they then interpret all that data through. And I would say that probably most of us have some unconscious commitments to these convictions, right? We haven't really thought them out. They're just kind of there. There's a conviction, and that's just how we view the world. I would say that most of us have also conscious convictions, like, yeah, this is what I think is right. This is what I think is true. So there, I think, is a little bit of both of those. Okay. What I think that we want to do is make sure that we have properly understood what are those deepest held convictions that we have as Christians that then allow us to interpret all the data that we come across on a daily basis, whether that be some news article, whether that be an encounter with our neighbor, whether that be whatever. Hey, you're not supposed to be up here. Sorry, my dog. But anyway, right? So when we think then about that project, okay, a worldview, I want to go ahead and put it in these terms. There are certain questions that all of us probably have asked or have maybe thought about asking or kind of there behind the scenes that we want to bring to the very forefront, and then start to analyze them with you know with some rigor, okay, and kind of lay these things out so that we can then articulate to ourselves and we can articulate to those around us why we believe what we believe. Okay, and so a worldview, the all worldviews really start with this, okay, and that is how in the world did we get here, okay, and how did all of this get here, okay, and that's I think most of us, I would venture to say all of us, have thought about that question. Okay, many of you, of course, have been, gone through science degrees, engineering degrees, and this is something that you probably thought quite a bit about. But how did we all get here? And the answer to that question is going to impact then pretty much everything about how we view all the other questions that have meaning to human beings. Okay. And there are really only, when you start to analyze this, there are really only three possible answers to that question. Okay. First, God did it. Okay. That would be, God brought it all into existence. And then, of course, if that's true of what you are convicted of, you want to analyze, well, who then is God? Okay. And so that's one. Okay. The second possible set of answers would be, and understand this, that when we say God did it, okay, we would be saying something along the lines of that a personal, transcendent being made a decision to bring into existence all matter and then shape it in the form that we see it today. How exactly that all was done is not, necessarily clear, but the fact that there's this transcendent personal being, and by transcendent we mean that this is a being that transcends time, energy, and matter. Okay, that then brought all that into existence. Okay, so a personal beginning. Okay, that would be category number one of how to answer that question. How did we all get here? The second category in answer would be that there's something impersonal that brought all things into existence. Okay, so like you could consider an astrophysicist, or many atheists or something along those lines. They'll say that maybe there was this quantum fluctuation that occurred, before the Big Bang or whatever, that then brought it all into existence through this thing that we call the Big Bang, right? Then at the very core of the question, what brought all things into existence, there was energy, there was something, along those lines. But notice that if it is energy, then that's impersonal, right? There's not a decision that was made. There's not a will that was imposed to do this. Okay, and there's all sorts of worldviews that would fall under that category of an impersonal thing brought all things into existence. In fact, if you were to look at many of the Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism and all these kinds of things, at the very core of them, they'll say this energy has always existed. There's this I know I'm not going to say that I'm an expert in these religions, but there's some sort of energy that in trend transcendent energy, impersonal force that has brought all things into existence. And the goal of our existence is to get back into that. So anyway, so that's category number two. Category number three, in terms of answers to the question how we all got here, is, well, nothing was there and then something was there. So, and there's not a lot of people that will say that, I don't think, because that kind of posits this idea that there is nothing, and what we mean by nothing is nothing. There was, it's not like there was energy. That's something, It's not like there was matter. That's something. There was nothing. No atoms, no protons, no anything. And then all of a sudden something came into existence. And that's, a very difficult thing to try and explain. So I don't think that there's anyone that seriously puts that forth as a possible answer to how we all got here. Okay. But understand this then, that question, how did we all get here, then shapes the view that a person is going to have of the world. Okay. And that then leads to these other types of questions. And we'll see how then we can start to put these things into categories, and how we can see how the answer to that question then starts to explain all these other things. Okay. And a lot of people will say, well, then that answer to that question, how we all got here, is the ultimate explainer, the first principle of a worldview, that then we trace all of our worldview back to the nature of that thing, or that someone, or that something that brought all things into existence. Okay, so the next then question, that worldview, that you want to start to analyze in terms of a worldview is, well, then, who are we, and who is mankind? Okay, and who am I? And what does it mean to be a human being? And that's a very important question that lies at the heart and at the center of all worldviews, right? And let me just, kind of see, let's kind of see how the answer to our first question starts to shape the answer to that next question. Okay, so if the answer to our first question is that some impersonal force brought all this into existence. Okay, let's say it's just you have the worldview of materialism, that physics describes, all the laws of physics describe all of chemistry, all of chemistry and its laws describe all of biology, and biology describes the mind. Okay, then you are left with this idea that then, well, my mind is a result of the laws of physics. And so then my mind is determined by the laws of physics, is determined by the laws of chemistry. And really, my mind is an illusion at that point in time. It's complex chemistry, complex physics that brings about these thoughts in my brain that ultimately, though, have their basis in just physical stuff and matter. Okay. That would be, shaped from, how did we all get here? Okay, well, there was some material process that produced all this stuff that accidentally spit me out. Okay, that's one review. Okay, if you were to think about it from a Christian standpoint, okay, who am I? Well, I'm a human being. Well, who are human beings? Well, human beings were created. Okay, they were created by whom? By a personal God. And we were created by a personal God in his image. Okay, so then you start to then say, okay, well then the who we are, the nature of a human being, is based in who started all of this. Okay, and the nature of that being. Okay, or that something, and that's then right. We have the ultimate explainer, the first principle that then starts to explain all these other questions. Who are we? Okay, the next question, okay, that we want to start to put this worldview, right, our worldview glasses on, and try and understand these things is, well, what's my purpose, and what's the purpose of existence? Okay, so you can personalize it. You can say, what is my purpose? Or you can, extend that out into what is mankind's purpose. Okay, but worldviews try and address this question, and everyone has some idea. If you were to really press them on it, again, a lot of us don't do this. We don't have this. We haven't analyzed what we believe. But if you really start to have these kind of conversations with someone, at some point in time, you would ask, well, what's the purpose? Why are we all here? What's the why? Right? Why are we here? Right? And again, like let's take the two extremes, materialism and Christianity. Right? Materialism says we are here through a cosmic accident that just, through all these improbabilities brought us about. all the way through evolution, the whole thing. But there was no design, there was no intention, there was no purpose, there was nothing historically that foresaw our existence, and therefore our existence is purely accidental. Okay, that's one view of the world. And so then your answer to the question, well, why do I exist? Well, there's not really ultimately a purpose. You might try and find purpose, and you can do that. That's great. But ultimately, it all boils down to that you don't have a purpose. Okay. Christianity would say, well, there was a transcendent being that brought all this into existence, and his will, and through his will, he brought all this into existence, and therefore, our purpose is to find the will of that creator and understand the will of that creator. Okay. So you start to see again, you have the ultimate explainer. How do we all get here? Okay. And that starts to answer these questions, okay, or lead to answers to these questions. Okay. Who am I? Who is man? Why am I here? What is my purpose? Okay. Now, another aspect of that then would be, well, what is the purpose of mankind? Where is this all headed? Okay, so and again, you compare your Christianity to like materialistic worldview. Where all this is headed in a materialistic worldview, who knows? Okay, we got here through an accident. We're here until the next accident occurs, and then maybe mankind doesn't exist anymore. At some point in time, way into the future, there's going to be a massive heat death of the entire universe. So it's all going to kind of come to the end anyway. Whereas Christianity would say there's a will that God had to bring all this into existence. He wants mankind to discover that will. He has a will for his creation, and he's working to see that will brought about. Okay, so there's this purpose, okay, that we have, that all of history is focused to and is going toward. Okay, right now, the next question, okay, that then you start to have to address in your worldview is, okay, well, all that's great, okay, but what's wrong with everything? What's wrong with humanity? Because there is, we see on a daily basis, every time we look at the news, we see horrible things occurring. And there is this, what we would consider to be evil things going on a fairly consistent basis within our world. And so, why is that the case? What is causing this evil? What is wrong with humanity? Okay. And that is a challenge to Christianity. But you know what? It's a challenge to every worldview. Every worldview has to account for a human and animal suffering. Okay. Every worldview has to account for evil and the actions of evil men. Okay. Why is that the case? And why is evil continually um, going on? And so that you have to deal with that data. That's a piece of data that you have to deal with. Okay, what causes all the evil in the world? And again, we're going to look at answers to that. Um, well, we'll just leave it at that. So on atheism, you might have a hard time actually finding a definition for evil. How do you ground something as evil versus good? Okay, Christianity, well, you have good and you have evil. Okay, and so what brought about evil? Did God create evil? That's a question. Or is there something else? Is there some other explanation for it? Okay. Okay. So and then finally, well, okay, so you've got evil. Is there a solution to that evil? What can be done about it? Okay. And that is also then a question that worldviews try and answer. Okay. And all of us have, like I said, at the very beginning of this, all of us have, whether we've thought about those questions or not, we probably have some answer to them in our mind that we might not even realize is there if we're really pressed on. Okay. But it all begins with this first question: how do we all get here? And then you work your way down. And so what we want to do, okay, in this study is we want to try and be careful in our analysis of the answer to those questions, look at Christianity, look at it objectively, kind of, and how it answers those questions, and then look at other worldviews and how they answer those questions as well. And this is where I will start to say, okay, um, the Christianity has greater explanatory power than other worldviews. Right? And here's how, and here are the criteria that I'm going to give to say that it has greater explanatory power. Okay, so when we look at a worldview, what we want to do is we want to think about, well, what are the answers to those questions? Are they logically consistent with one another? Okay, so like for instance, it's a logical inconsistency for someone that holds to materialism to say that yes, I'm a materialist. I believe that the only thing that exists is matter. The only thing that exists is the laws of physics and chemistry, and that results in biology. And that's their proposition of how everything came into existence. All these kind of things. It's logically inconsistent for that person then to say, the goal of my life is to make sure that my soul, once I die, goes to a nice place. Okay, that there's no such thing as the soul. There's no such thing as the immaterial in their worldview, and therefore, to say that the goal of and the purpose that I'm living in is to ensure that I being this immaterial thing ends up in heaven or something like that. That would be logically inconsistent. I think that in Christianity, it would be logically inconsistent to say that God is good, his character is good, he can only do good, and then he created evil. That's logically inconsistent. Okay, so for a Christian to say God created evil, would be logically inconsistent. Okay, so in worldview should avoid these logical inconsistencies. If they don't avoid logical inconsistencies, then they don't have good explanatory power. Okay, they don't make sense um, from that standpoint. Okay, now that's one criteria. Like I said, okay, there's two criteria that I want to analyze a worldview with. The other criteria is, can we live consistently with the conclusions of our worldview? Okay, so for instance, um, can a human being live consistently with a logical conclusion that I am a a result of purely physical laws and chemical laws that bring about this illusion that is my mind? Okay, can we live consistently within that? Okay, can we live consistently, like for instance, on that view, there's no such thing as free will. It's an illusion. Okay. But what is the data that we have pressing upon us each and every day? Okay. So, for instance, if I were to ask each of you, did you decide to come here tonight? Okay. You, you might, I think all of you would say, yeah, I did decide to come here. Okay. I've done this though with students. And I've said, okay, which one of you? I said, if you don't believe in free will, raise your hand. Okay, and I've actually had students raise their hand, and and, and then the next question, and this is what we have to say. The next question is, so did you decide to raise your hand or not? But that's the data that you have to deal with. You have to deal with that data. You have to be able to explain that data. And if you want to suppress that data and say, no, I didn't make a decision, then you're gonna have trouble convincing me that your worldview has great explanatory power. If you can't explain the reason that you raise your hand, then you're having a hard time. Okay, so those are the things that we want to look at. We want to look at, our worldviews, first of all, logically consistent, and if they're logically coherent and consistent, then can mankind live in accordance with their conclusions? Okay, and so that's what we'll kind of do now. That that then presents to us what a worldview is. A worldview is simply this lens that we view the most important questions in life through, starting with how we got here, and then work our way through that. Okay. Now, like I said, I don't, you know, there are lots of people that carefully analyze those questions, but there are lots of people that do not carefully analyze those questions. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to spend some time carefully analyzing those questions and looking at Christianity and its explanatory power. Okay. Now that's all I wanted to talk about tonight. It's, we didn't spend a ton of time. Okay. We still got 15 minutes left, but that's okay. We'll end early. Or we can have a discussion and a conversation about things. Hi, dog. Zeus, you gotta go away. So anyway, so we're gonna have a discussion about those things. But next time, what I want to do is I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about what do we mean when we say something is true. Okay, so if I say Christianity is true, what does that mean? Okay, and or when I say that that I have glasses on, is that true? I want to know what did that mean to say that? Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop right there, and we can chat about these things, and then we'll let you go. So, questions, thoughts?
So we're gonna kind of like tackle a question per week, I guess.
No, that's a good question. So what we'll do, so all I was trying to do with the questions was to put into our minds that when we say something like, "Oh, this is a worldview," and we're going to do worldview
Hmm.
analysis, what we're trying to do is we're looking at, okay, these are the questions that are the most pressing questions that need to be addressed by our most fundamental convictions, right? So if a person says, "I'm spiritual," and you say, "Okay, well, what does that mean?" And they say, "Well, I believe, like, do you believe in God?" "Well, no, I don't know. Like him, I believe in like a spirit being." "Oh, well, who is that spirit being? And did that spirit being create us all?" And go from there. Start to analyze what exactly is that mean. Okay, and start with that question. Well, okay, what do you like at the very fundamental aspect of who you are and what you believe? What is at the very bottom of all that? So that then we can start to address these other things that you might believe. Like, so lots of people just live inconsistently with what they believe. I think there are a lot of people that will say, "Oh, I believe that that the Big Bang brought us all into existence, that there was some quantum energy that brought it all into existence, and that's it." And you say, "Okay, so then how does that explain human nature? What does it mean to be human?" If that's and so that's what I'm trying to say is that I just put those questions out there to say, okay, when we think about a worldview, we start here. What is our first principle? And that then answers the rest of these questions. Okay, and try and analyze each of those things. Does that make sense?
But are you going to offer answers to those questions for
Yeah.
yourself, like as
Yeah.
you go through the study?
For sure.
Is there gonna be a time where you discuss what you believe and how you answer the question of problem of evil?
Yes, yes. So I will go through. So I will go through. So what we'll do next time is we'll talk about what does it mean for something to be true, and then after that we'll go right into the Christian worldview.
Okay.
Okay, and we're gonna say this is what Christianity says to these major questions, and I don't know how long that will take, Ben. But yeah, we'll go through each of those things, addressing only Christianity, and then we'll jump into this book, Finding Truth. Okay, and what Finding Truth will do, so that will be kind of the primer for Finding Truth, and then what we'll do in this Finding Truth book is she lays out this like strategy for analyzing any worldview, and it's similar to what I just did, but she does it in a lot a lot more detail. And I really want you all. The reason I want to do that is because I really want you all to just read the book, because she does a really good job of going through this. And so then if we're meeting on a weekly basis, then you're reading the book, and that's a good thing. So because this is something Nancy Piercy, this is what she does, right? She's trained herself as a philosopher and a theologian to analyze worldviews. So yeah, does that make sense? Cool. Other questions?
I just downloaded it on Audible.
Yes. So, oh yeah, that's right. You can listen to it if you have Audible, and I listened to it, and then I was like, oh, I got to get the actual book. But yeah, it's like 8 hours long or something like on Audible. So you can listen to it on the way to work, and we'll go through it one chapter at a time. We won't get there for another 3 or 4 weeks, um, but yeah, that's certainly. I kept on thinking to myself, I kept on reading it and then writing things like, okay, yeah, that's really good. And it was like, I just feel like it would be better if they just read the book. I'm going to use so much of it anyway. Why not just read the book instead of just keep quoting Nancy Piercy? So, okay. Awesome. Other questions?
Can you all hear me okay? I moved places, so I'm not sure if my quality is still coming through.
We can hear you, Alex.
Okay, great. So one of the questions I've been thinking about as you've been posing these is like from your perspective or observation of students or colleagues or neighbors, how often do you think people are asking themselves these questions these days? Because to me, it seems like people are content with, it's my truth and it is what it is, and I'm not going to question things too deeply, or I'm just too distracted or too busy or what have you. And I guess sort of the follow on is how can you like incentivize people to think about these questions without it coming across as antagonistic because you're forcing them to perhaps analyze their quote unquote truth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I would say that obviously this is anecdotal. I don't have numbers on this. I would say that the majority of students that I come across probably don't seriously address these things. They don't seriously think about them.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that when they hear me, and this is something that bothers me, and I don't know how exactly to address this, but when they hear me introduce myself as a Christian, I think that many of them probably think, well, that's his truth, or that's his bias, maybe even.
Right.
And um,
Mm.
and and then they move on from there. Some of it pisses them off. Some of them it intrigues them. Some of them it encourages them because they have thought about it and they are Christians. And some of
Right.
them it's really intriguing to them. They want to ask questions about that. In terms of incentivizing it, I don't think we can. I don't think that we can
Hmm.
in make at least in my experience. I would love it if you've come up with something along those lines, but I don't know. I don't know if we can. Um, I don't know if we can. I guess I'm trying to think about as I think about this. I think that here's what I'll say. I live my life in such a way so as to glorify Christ, right? And that I would be a light unto the world,
Mhm.
so that the people that interact with me at some point in time in their life will say, that person exhibited XYZ that I thought was attractive, and then they said that they were a Christian. You see what I'm saying? And
Mhm. Yeah.
so like that's I think probably the greatest quote unquote way to incentivize someone to think about these things. I think that if someone comes into my office and asks me, you know, a question, they're already kind of thinking about that. And then this is where what we're
Mhm.
trying to do now would be really helpful. Is like, okay, well, let's start here. Let's analyze what do you believe, right? Like, let's see
Right.
are you consistent in those things? So that would be, but that person's probably already thinking about it if they're asking you a question. Um, so
Mhm. Mhm.
I
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
yeah, I mean, obviously I spend time in a class carefully stating things, asking questions, knowing that for some of these students, hopefully it will kind of like kickstart them into thinking something along those lines. But by and large, I think there's a lot of people that are just willing to just say, that's his truth, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll address some of that. I think Nancy Piercy addresses some of that. and I'm not a historian, nor am I a philosopher, so I'm certainly not a historian of philosophy. Okay, but if you really want to trace the thought patterns of centuries that brought us to our moment here and now, I would suggest the book or listening to the book, um, the triumph, the rise and the triumph of the modern self. Um, who is the author? Carl Trueman. The Rise and the Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman. But be ready. Like put your bootstraps on. It's not an easy read. Or if you're on Audible, it's not an easy listen. Although Carl Trueman is the author and he is from England and he narrates it on Audible, and so it's actually really pleasurable to listen to because he's got this great accent. So, so
Nice, nice.
yeah, but that would be one. And then he wrote another like kind of abbreviated version of that. But he traces like the philosophical thought that brought us to the moment, and really his focus is more along the lines of how we got to a place where a person can say I'm transgender, right? How we got to that, but it goes right along with how we got to, well, that's his truth versus my truth. Francis Schaeffer and his, I mean, he has like 5 volumes worth of work. I've read a lot of his stuff, but Escape from Reason would be another really good resource. So I read that this summer. It's a pretty short read, but it's kind of heady as well. He's a philosopher. He actually was writing though in the 70s and the 80s. And so that was like 30 or 40 or and 50 years ago. But his work essentially predicted the moment that we are in right now. When he traced it, could you could clearly see where we were headed, um, based off of his view of what was happening in culture and art in the 1970s and 80s. So he would be really good too. Escape from Reason by Francis Schaeffer, and then Nancy Piercy takes up his work in Total Truth, which she wrote. I think that she wrote that in the early 2000s, early 21st century. So she does a really good job of tracing that too. But how we got to this idea of this is my truth, and that's kind of an interesting story. So it's unfortunate, but yeah, that can help you. But it's like I said, I'm not a historian and not a philosopher, so it's hard to go through all that. So yeah,
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I appreciate the context and the reading. So I'll be checking those out in the near future.
yeah, yeah. I didn't give you a small amount of reading just there.
It's got a dissertation work.
Yeah. Here's what I would say: if you want to pick just probably one book to answer that question, Total Truth would probably be the best. Just one, if you're going to take just one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll be the top of the list.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And did you mention she was saved out of the ministry
Francis Schaeffer.
of Francis Schaeffer? So she's heavily
yeah. So the Francis Schaeffer he's a philosopher, and he and his wife Edith Schaeffer developed a ministry. They called it Labrie Ministries, and it was essentially like not a farm, but yeah, I guess a farm.
It was just their house.
It was their house, yeah,
Switzerland.
in Switzerland, and they just opened their doors and said, we want to answer people's questions, and the Lord brought him all sorts of people to answer questions, and then he wrote a whole bunch of work. But Labrie Ministries was very influential in leading to the salvation of many individuals that are on what we would consider the front edge of worldview analysis, and in particular putting Christianity out there, as an apologetic and making arguments for the veracity of Christianity. Yeah. So, and Nancy Piercy is a person that was saved in Labrie Ministries. Her story is actually kind of really interesting. So she was abused as a child by a man that was a pastor. So I think he's a pastor. Christian man. I know that. Not a pastor, a professor. That's right, but a Christian. So, or a professing Christian anyway. So, yeah.
And that's part of the whole part of the Christian worldview. I think that we have to really begin, I think in our day and age, begin to really understand, because I think the world Christian has taken on so much. It can imply so many people come under the banner of Christianity, and it's not Christian. It's not the way. It's not following Jesus. It's a whole bunch of crap added to maybe one kernel of truth, and then they piled on a bunch of crap. But so I think as far as incentivizing, I wonder, like in this day and age, sometimes I think we have to take into consideration where we are in the time period of what the Lord's doing. Because sometimes I think we look back and say, how could we replicate something? And it may be that, like we've talked about this, where it may be that he's not asking you to replicate that. He may be asking you to go in and plow really hard ground and see not much of anything. And if that's what he's asking you to do, then that's where you obey.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I wonder if like we have to have kind of a mindset of where is he at with culture right now, and where's he moving? Because he may not be moving in a way for people to really hear reason and then have that change their mind.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, the parable of the sower is really important in that regard. I mean, you mentioned hard ground, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's really what I think, we're called to do, is cast our seed, or and be the tool to water or whatever that is. But ultimately, the ground of the heart has to be prepared by the Lord, and so.
And you have to be ready to fit into that preparation piece. And
yeah.
Sometimes there are some people that will work their whole life and not really see fruit
results.
Yeah. But yeah, they're part of it, but they just can't see it till the end. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Any other thoughts, questions? No? Okay. Awesome.
All right.
I was waiting to do that.
I'm going to stop the recording now.